Hi, I'm Ian.
And I'm Jason.
And this is Ghosts and Bears, the only podcast where we bring you the actual ghosts
with the actual stories
from actual bears. On this episode, we're off to summer camp, boys and girls, and it's not exactly what you're thinking. While it may not be the horror movie kind, it's still pretty spooky, and we're going to dive into that on this episode of Ghosts and Bears. Well, hello. Unfortunately for you, it is Uncle Ian once again. Jason has, well, he's going to be done his MBA in April. So let's just say there's no guarantees on anything until then. But I wanted to make sure we got the episode out on time. And I'm super excited about us doing our theme episodes, the summer theme. And this episode, of course, is summer camps. And this actually has a pretty good place in my heart. I worked for a lot of years with the church organization. My first time going to summer camp, I remember I thought I was going to be a camp counselor. I was 16, and the Anglican church in Alberta, in Calgary specifically, we didn't have our own camp. But what we would do is we would rent the Baptist camp for 2 weeks. And the first week was junior camp, and the second week was senior camp. So I thought I was volunteering to be a camp counselor. And when I got there, I had just started playing guitar 2 weeks earlier. And I got there and I brought my guitar because I wanted to practice. And they're like, "Oh, you brought a guitar?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You're the music guy." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, you're going to play all the music for the morning chapel services, and you're going to lead all the music for the campfires." And I'm just like, no. And they're like, "Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine." And that is literally how I learned on the fly to lead large groups of people singing stupid camp songs. So there you go. And then when I was in Vancouver Island, I worked for the Diocese of BC, and we had a camp, actually a pretty amazing place called Camp Columbia. It had been left by an old British military man. He and his sister lived, the Hennages, they lived on Thetis Island, and they had this patch of land they moved on to many years ago after World War II. And when they died, they left it for a summer camp for kids. And so there are all these weird buildings on there, and of course the very old Hannage house. And I was there a lot, several times during the summer. I used to do a winter thing when, of course, the place had been shut down for a few months, and then we'd all come in for that kind of weekend thing we'd do right before Christmas, and it was pretty neat. It had waterfront right into the ocean, a bunch of really rough cabins, like no electricity, no glass in the window. The bathrooms are pretty rough, and it had just a bunch of really weird buildings that had been placed there pretty much since 1940 on. And it always had a weird feel. Like, I don't think the Hennages ever completely left. The main house always felt like you weren't by yourself. A couple times I would get there really early. Like, I'd get there kind of first thing in the morning, and I'd be there all day by myself until the rest of the staff got there. And you definitely heard other things moving around in the house that were not really there. So I just kind of rolled with it. But the whole place had a weird feel. There was a tree that they planted for this girl. She was one of the lifeguards, and she died back in the 80s. She drowned, ironically, and that tree kept dying. So like every couple of years they'd plant a new one because, you know, this memorial tree. Anyway, when things started to go a little sideways with all the churches in terms of funding and money and people actually attending, they just sold the land. They just sold it off. And whoever bought it has mothballed it, and they tore down all the cabins and the outbuildings. I think they kept the main house and the newer house, but the place is just kind of a deserted wreck now. So it's a bit sad. So all those years, like literally like 70 years of history, just kind of all done. So yeah, But those are my summer camp memories. I never went to summer camp as a kid. We would do day camps and stuff, but we didn't go to like week-long sleepover camps. We were too poor. So that was kind of my own experience. But I did get to have that camp experience vicariously through all of the kids who went through when I was like music counselor and I was the chapel leader and all those kind of fun things. So I'm really glad I got that experience and I got to see what it's like, and I understand why people develop the friendships they do, and they just feel like they're family, like your camp friends are your best friends in the whole wide world, because you have this really intense week with them. And then they're gone and you don't see them again, maybe ever, but most of the time you do get to see them kind of the following year. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So we're going to be talking about summer camps, specifically haunted ones. And also other stuff going on. It's just really hot here right now. I'm so grateful we don't have the crazy wildfires that we've had last year. This time last year, there was just so much smoke from the wildfires in northern BC. And it was going everywhere. I know it was even hitting the States, the smoke from the fires across Canada and the United States. Really grateful we don't have those yet. Knock on wood. But other than that, it's just super warm. Just really, really, really warm. And me working from home, this is my first summer working from home. It's hot. So that's been a bit much. But thankfully, the recording studio is down in the basement, so at least I got a break from the heat down here. Also, ghostly walks. I know I talked about them last time, but I'm still really excited about how that's all going. I keep getting bookings almost every day, so the walks for July are slowly filling up. I've even had bookings for August and bookings for October as well, so I'm pretty excited. And I did a piece for the local newspaper, so that's going to come out. And I did a piece for CBC Radio, which is like NPR for all our friends in the States, but local. So that's really cool. So that will probably blanket the north of BC. So that'll be great. And yeah, just feeling really good about it. Other than that, I signed off on the final approval for Calgary's Most Haunted, which is going to be getting printed later this month, and it will be launched in October. So yay! So going to be heading to Calgary for that. So if you're in the Calgary area in October, you should definitely maybe take a beat and see when we're going to be doing that. I believe, let me just take a quick peek here. I believe it's going to be the weekend of October 18th and 19th in there. So if you're in the Calgary area, you want to come to a really, really, really low-key book launch, then stay tuned because I will be doing, of course, the obligatory reading and book signing and hopefully answering some questions and just having a good time with people who enjoy ghost stories. So we'll see how that goes. So yeah, so that's what's sort of going on in our world. Jason's still working on school, doing what he's doing. We almost are done with this stupid reno down here, the enforced insurance reno. And when that's done, our basement will get put back together and hopefully life will be a little more balanced, but probably not because it's us. So that's kind of the way that works. So keeping in our theme, we've got ghostly summer camp stories. And I'm excited about that. As I said, lots of tie-ins for me with summer camps. One of my favorite stories from summer camp, it was when we were in Alberta, and it had been a really, really, really dry summer. And we used to have to set up almost like a guard. There was a gazebo in the middle of the field, and the boys' cabins were at one end of the field and the girls' cabins were at the other. But it didn't stop the boys or the girls from escaping from their cabins around midnight, 1 a.m., trying to reach the boys' cabins or vice versa. And so we would have to kind of pick 3 or 4 people who were going to sit in this gazebo in the dark and just wait for these kids to do this. And then, of course, we'd send them back. Well, one year, we didn't even think of that. We were all set to do it. But we got there, and the owners of the camp, the Baptist camp, said, listen, because it's been so dry, we've had a lot of coyotes and wolves coming into camp and scratching at the cabin doors because they're looking for food. And so please, if you have kids who are going to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, please let them know they have to go in pairs. And we put big sticks inside all the doorways of the cabins. And if they leave the cabin, they've got to go in pairs and they have to carry the stick so that if something, kind of comes after them, then there's a way to defend themselves. And we're like, oh my gosh, yeah, of course. Thank you for telling us. So the first night we make that announcement, hey, welcome to camp. By the way, there's giant dogs who are looking to eat you. Never really thinking about it, just letting them know. And then that first night, not one kid tried to cross the Great Divide. And we're like, oh, that's weird. And then the second night, same thing, like not one kid. And so we asked the kids, we're like, so what's going on? One of the counselors did. And they're like, well, we're not getting eaten by wolves. Like, there's nothing worse, nothing worth that. And we're like, sweet. So then we didn't have to sit in the gazebo anymore. So after that, we told the kids every year that coyotes were coming into the camp and they better be careful. I mean, it was the 80s. I mean, safety, vague notion. When I think about the things, like how we got kids to swim in the ocean and, oh my gosh, what were we thinking? It's amazing as many kids went home as actually went home. But I'm glad they did. And anyway, we're going to come back second in our series of summertime adventures, summer camps. So stay tuned and come back right after this. All right, my friends, welcome back. We are going to be reading some stories from summer camps, and I'm sure you're all excited as I am. And we are going to be, they're from all over the world, so that's fun. Mostly, I got to be honest with you, mostly the US and Canada. And that's because other countries aren't stupid enough to send their children off to the wilderness to be watched by teenagers. So I think that's really what it boils down to. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about that, and this first one's actually from Malibu Canyon, bastion of people with no money. Just kidding. So that's what this first one is from, and we'll jump right in. There was a camp in Malibu Canyon called Lazy J Ranch Camp, and my parents sent me for 2 weeks when I was 8 or 9, and it was the only sleepaway camp that I made my parents pick me up early from. I went to a bunch of Southern California sleepaway camps, and I've never experienced anything like this in my life. I slept in my parents' bed for like 6 weeks after. The camp had a lot of land, and it was mountainous and literally in the middle of nowhere. The boys' barracks were directly behind the outdoor stables for the horses, yet there was no stable. They would chain the horses up directly behind our cabin in a big raised polo-type field. In between the bunks and the fence, they would chain the horses to what was like a 5 to 6 foot slope dirt hill that hit the foundation of the bunk. On one day, 6 or so boys in my cabin were throwing pebbles at the girls' cabin, aren't they always? And we used the path behind our bunk to sneak in and out of the other bunk without our counselors noticing. Trust me, they noticed. They didn't care. They were either too high or they just didn't care. We ran back and forth, exhausted playing this game, until the 6 of us ran back for a final time through the alleyway just below the horse fence. As we were sneaking back, we looked up and we saw a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the top of the horse fence bar, which was level to the roof of the barracks. Someone from the 6 boys said something like, "Hey, what bunk are you in? We won't throw rocks at the bunk if you don't say it was us." And the girl started like swinging back and forth on the fence, using her hands to support her. And we were like, what the hell is she doing up there? Someone else from the group shouted at her and was like, "Do you even go here, horse girl?" Because we could see this kid like clear as day, and she was not in any of the bunks, nor had had any of the 3 meals with our age groups throughout the week. Within seconds, the girl looked behind her as if something came up to her, like a horse, because the thing was looking to pet it, but we couldn't see past the fence because it was on a small hill above us. Within seconds, the girl was thrown from the fence and did like somersaults down the hill, all messed up and contorted, and she came to rest about 5 feet in front of the first person in the alley. I was behind them, and we all freaked out, screaming like little girls, because this girl was like a pretzel lying against the foundation of our cabin, barrack, bunk, whatever you want to call it. We screamed so hard and ran to our counselor, and he got up and went back there, and I swear to God there was nothing there. We had ran maybe 30 feet around the corner from where this girl was lying to get an adult, and there was nothing. Mind you, this is a group of 8-year-old boys. None of us are over the age of 10 at this point. Our counselor got so mad at us, but too many of us had seen it to just let it be, and we all wanted to go home that minute. Some of the kids that saw it were so scared they had full-blown tantrums to get their parents on the phone. Our counselor had to call the owner of the camp, a CEO manager, the guy you're scared of with a walkie-talkie and a golf cart, and we all told him what happened. The response to this matter was probably the weirdest thing, thinking back on it. After we told our stories to the camp manager, he looked at us in complete shock. He was speechless. Then the guy goes on to say, "Who can stay the rest of the week and have a really fun time?" And like 5 or 6 of us were adamant that we wanted home now. Which, thinking about it, is pretty bad on the camp because my parents totally could have been on vacation instead of shipping me off for the 2 weeks. He then goes on to tell us that before the camp there was a horse ranch mainly, and that one of the horse rancher's daughter used to feed the horses daily for a while. One day, she was sitting on the railing and a horse came up from behind her wanting food, and she got scared and fell forward down the hill, breaking a bunch of bones, and died. My parents picked me up within 2 hours, and the car ride home was silent. I brought this up to my mother recently, and she was completely dumbfounded. My mom told me that she was called from the camp manager that night saying that a big fight erupted and that me and a few other boys were harassing the other campers. I don't know what to make of it, but it was real to 6 to 8-year-olds. During the months... Oh, it was real for 6 8-year-olds. Yeah, no kidding. And I love that the camp manager pinned it on the kids and not the camp. And probably that meant he got to keep the money because the kid wasn't going home. He was being kicked out. Clever, right? That's pretty weaselly though. But that's crazy. And I don't doubt for a second that 6 individual people, even if they were 8, they all saw it. They all described the same thing. That would be insane, especially when the story backs it up. So that's a pretty cool story. So thanks for that one. You never know what you're going to find in Malibu. Charles Manson. All right. Here we go. We have another one now. This one was from Michigan. During the summers, I would spend a month or so visiting family in Michigan. Some of my cousins my age would go to a camp in the UP called Hiawatha. The cabins we got assigned for the week had about 6 campers and 2 counselors, and were spaced far apart from each other deep in the woods away from the in-common area. There were stories about a father and a son that were hunting near the campgrounds during the off-season. The story went that the father thought he saw a big buck and took a shot at it only to get to the deer and find out he'd shot his son in the neck. Being so deep in the woods and such a fatal shot, he shot his son in the head to stop the pain. The game and wildlife agents that found them said the father suffered an apparent gunshot wound through the roof of his mouth, out of his head, and what looked like a murder-suicide. The counselors always felt it necessary to tell this story to the younger or new campers. Don't they always? Honestly, counselors, a sadistic bunch. I'm not even kidding you. Now, I don't know if hearing the story in the atmosphere of cabins, being so far from the common areas and deep in the woods caused me to see things, but a friend and I were walking from the cabins to the mess hall early one morning before the breakfast bell, and we saw what looked like a father and son dressed like they were hunting, carrying shotguns, walking towards our cabin. Ours was almost second from being the farthest from anything. We took off so fast, sprinting through the trees, and once we hit the open field between the cabins and the mess hall, we saw another group of guys running out behind us. We were shocked to see anyone else before the bell rang, and running no less. We asked why they were running too, and they looked back from the direction they came, turned back to us and said, "We saw a hunter pointing a shotgun at us." Ooh. That's a really sad story though. As a parent, no, thank you. But no, honestly, counselors, if you like kids when you start the summer, you don't when you're done the summer. And like I said, my experiences were at church camps, which I suppose were a little less hedonistic than regular camps with camp counselors, but probably not that much. Next story. This happened to me a couple of years ago. I was 10 years old in grade 5. My class went to summer camp for 2 nights. It started on the first night. My friends and I were talking and telling stories when I noticed there was some writing on my bunk. Someone had written a story in pencil. I read it over and then called everyone over to look. I don't remember the exact wording, but it went something like this. One night, a bunch of us decided to sneak out of our cabin into the mess hall for snacks. The sky was completely clear. We snuck in and started messing around, chasing each other and jumping on tables. Suddenly there was a flash of light and a crack of thunder, but the sky was still clear. We freaked out and ran back to our cabin. A few of the girls thought it was nothing, but me and a couple of the others had this strange feeling that it was true. And suddenly we didn't feel all that safe in our own cabin anymore. Anyway, we went to sleep, and sometime in the middle of the night, the ones who believed the story, me included, all woke up, and there was a flash of light and a crack of thunder, same as the story. We all fell back asleep almost instantly. When I woke up the next morning, I thought it had just been a dream. But then when I asked my friend about it, she'd seen and heard it too, and so had the others who believed. Now we were really scared. The only thing was there had been no thunder and lightning in the night before. It was just us. The day went on pretty normal, and then that night something even stranger happened. A bunch of the girls were looking out their window. And what we saw was impossible. There was a little girl, about 4 years old, skipping through the forest, wearing what looked like a white wedding dress. When she went behind a tree, she didn't come out the other side. She just disappeared. The other girls said that she stopped and waved at them before skipping away. We went out to find her, but she was completely gone. No one else believed us, but we all know what we saw. The story was true, and that little girl was real, or at least she used to be. I think she was a ghost. None of us have seen her since, but none of us can forget those nights. Oh, that's a little creepy. I wonder what the deal was with the lightning and thunder kind of coming before the ghost. That's interesting. Maybe to make them pay attention? Oh, who knows? Off to Oregon, friends. Oh, Oregon, Illinois. Is there an Oregon, Illinois? American friends, please fill me in. That seems weird to name a place in another state after a state. But what do I know? You know what? I just saw Saskatoon Lake in Alberta, so maybe it's not so weird. Anyway, my story takes place at White Pines Dude Ranch in Oregon, Illinois. I was 10 years old at the time, and I was visiting the ranch with my Girl Scout troop. My best friend was also a member of this troop, and she was with me during this weird encounter. The Dude Ranch has a bunkhouse, mess hall, and pool. For an added scary effect, there's a graveyard right next to the pool. Oh, perfect. Probably all the dead campers. This was the summer that the original Poltergeist movie came out. Almost all of us had seen the movie. In fact, for most of us, it was the first horror movie we'd seen in the theater. Those of us that hadn't seen it were still well aware of the dreaded pool scene from the movie. The pool is located next to the mess hall. The mess hall is located maybe a quarter mile away from the bunkhouse. A cement walkway leads from the front door of the bunkhouse to the front door of the mess hall. There are grassy fields on either side of the walkway, and there are no trees in the fields to block the view. This incident occurred in broad daylight, so we were both able to see clearly. My friend and I were walking on the walkway from the bunkhouse to the mess hall, and we weren't speaking. We were just two little girls walking and enjoying the fresh air. All of a sudden, I heard footsteps behind us. The footsteps were walking in the same direction as we were. The next part is a moment I will never forget. Without saying a word to my friend, I casually turned to see who was behind us, expecting to see another one of our friends. My friend turned around at the exact same moment, presumably with the same intention as myself. To my shock and dismay, the sound of footsteps could still be very clearly heard advancing towards us, but there was no one there. I slowly turned to face my friend as she did the same. We still had not said one word to each other. What I saw in her face was a reflection of what I could feel my own face doing. Her eyes got wide. She turned to look back at the path again, as did I, and then looked back at me as her jaw dropped, and we both screamed at the same time and started running for our lives. As we reached the mess hall, two of our friends jumped out from behind two barrels while shouting boo. We both screamed so loud that our friends actually looked at each other quizzically. Next, we began to laugh hysterically with relief when we asked them how on earth they were able to produce those footsteps so far up the road. Our friends then asked us, footsteps? What footsteps? It turned out that jumping out at us had been the extent of their prank. We told them what had transpired on the path, and they were immediately intrigued and asked to be taken to that spot. We took them there straight away, but we were unable to hear the footsteps anymore. So, being typical 10-year-old girls, we decided that we would wait until lights out that night to return to the spot and see if we could hear them. Once everyone else was asleep, we four did sneak out. Yet, we didn't hear any footsteps. We were all disappointed, especially my best friend and I, because we wanted the others to hear it to validate our experience. And of course, because it would have been more fun. Well, there you go. Yeah, I don't think summer camps are the quiet places we think they are. They have a lot going on. You have a lot of emotion there, a lot of devotion to the camps, a lot of times. And yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, I don't know. And the Bible camps, probably even more than others, because people get very fervent about them. Our next one involves the Garfield Ghost Town, which I had not heard of before, but this is a very cool story. I work at a summer camp, and like most camps, of course, there's going to be some ghost stories being told. Well, one weekend when just staff was at the camp, we were all hanging out around the fire, and some of the local counselors told us a story about the Garfield Ghost Town, which just so happened to be almost directly across the highway from the camp. Apparently, sometime during the late 1800s, the town had been abandoned, and almost all the buildings, except for a barn and an old house, were relocated to the nearest town. But many local people still visit the abandoned area because there's still a cemetery of the people who died, while Garfield was still an active town. That's so funny. That's like Phoenix, just outside of Greenwood. We drove up there this summer and we went up the mountain, and sure enough, the cemetery is still there and the monument for World War I of the dead. But soon after World War I, when the copper prices tanked, they literally jacked up every single building and hauled it down the mountain to the town of Greenwood, where it is to this day. But that original town of Phoenix is still up there. It's crazy. But the amount of people who've had paranormal experiences is kind of insane. There's even a meeting held every year where those who have had encounters with ghosts all gather and tell their stories. Of course, all of us newer counselors decided it would be a great idea to take the golf course across the highway and go check out the abandoned town ourselves. There were 6 of us packed onto this golf course. That sounds like such a great plan. 3 boys and 3 girls. It was the middle of the night, and the only light came from the lights from our phones and the flashlights of a couple of the boys had brought. First, we decided to check out the cemetery. Of course you did. The graves were crumbling and falling over. The whole place had a really creepy feel to it. I ended up finding a little trail in the corner of the graveyard leading into the woods. I yelled to my friend B that I was going to check it out while they explored and took pictures. At the end of this trail, there was a single grave. It had cracked in half and was almost grown over. I almost would have missed it had I not almost tripped over the headstone. This was the point I started to get really creeped out. I quickly ran back to my friends. I just wanted to go back at this point because I felt like someone was watching us. So did both of the other girls, but the boys shrugged it off like we were just being babies. Typical boys. After this, the boys decided we should go check out the buildings that had been left behind. There was an old barn and a house that was halfway sunk into the ground. We decided the barn would be a better place to start because we were less likely to fall through any floors. While inside the barn, no one really noticed anything new, and we quickly grew bored. I remember telling the boys we should just get through the house and get back to camp because by this time, I was feeling really uncomfortable with us being there. We entered the house through the front door, and the floorboards seemed sturdy enough on the first floor. There were old pictures and paintings on the wall, and the walls were covered in old newspaper, which had been used as a wallpaper. After we felt we'd gone as far as we safely could on the first floor, after the first couple of rooms there was holes in the floor leading down to the basement, we decided to go see if the upstairs would have anything of interest. The flooring was actually in better condition, but all we found up there was some old toys and a cat skeleton. Ew, poor kitty. So then we checked out the last place, the basement. Since we could not trust the floor, we ended up going outside and looking for the cellar door. I found it and called my friends over. When we were downstairs, there wasn't a ton to look at. Just some shelves with jars of old canned goods in one room and an old wood stove in the other. We were all in the room with the wood stove when all of us girls heard a man's voice that said, "You don't belong here. Leave." For some reason, none of the boys heard the voice, but all of us girls did, and at this point, we were practically begging the boys to let us all leave. They just kept saying, "Just hold up, we can leave in a little bit." Us girls practically on top of the boys, holding on to them for protection, which was probably the boys' plan, honestly. After a couple minutes of them refusing to let us leave, we hear a huge crash. When we went to check out what it was, it looked as if someone had grabbed a whole shelf of the jars and threw them against the opposite wall. We ran like hell. That golf cart couldn't go fast enough for us to feel safe. But as we were leaving, a different voice that sounded like it belonged to a small girl whispered in our ears, "Don't come back." Once again, the boys heard nothing, which is incredibly frustrating because they all thought we were making it up. That's so weird because teenage boys are known for their sensitivity and kindness. I live about half an hour from Garfield, and my younger sister, who's 17, has been begging me to take her back to see the town herself. I refuse to go back. If a ghost can throw a whole shelf against a wall, who's to say what it can do to a person who ignored its warning to never go back? Fair enough. I mean, come on. That's pretty crazy. That reminds me of, I think it's Stephen King wrote a story about a train station. And if you haven't read it, you should. And if you why can't I remember the name of it? It just popped into my head. Basically, you start the story thinking everyone is literally just waiting for a train. And as you get through the story, you realize they all died a very long time ago. But their perception of reality is that they're just waiting for the train and the train station hasn't changed at all. But in reality, the train station is pretty much falling down around them, but they can't see it. It kind of reminds me of that as far as whatever's in that house is concerned, that's their house. And to us, it's of course is going to look like it's rotting and coming apart. But to whatever is there, it's their house. And it looks the same as it did when they were there. So I understand why they would get upset. Our next story is about a place called the Burns Ranch. So it's not quite a summer camp story, but close enough. And this takes place in Kansas, which I've been to. It's a lovely state. Mind the tornadoes. I spent the first 18 years of my life living in a small Kansas town. Although there was little reason to stay, it was such a great place to grow up, and I have many fond memories of exploring the nearby woods and rivers. A lot of strange things happened in and around that town, but I'll just tell the one story for now about the Burns Ranch. The Burns Ranch was located about 5 miles west of town, situated at the base of a gently sloping hill, literally out in the middle of nowhere. A curving gravel road was the only way to get there, and beyond the house, the same road soon petered out into dry ruts that faded into miles and miles of unused pasture land. The house itself was a 2-story Victorian that had to have been built in the early 1900s. It was old, but wonderfully remodeled and a beauty to behold. A smaller, more modern guest house stood behind it, and an ancient barn nearby completed things. All of this had been in the Burns family for generations, handed down from one son to the other until it finally reached Richard Burns. At the time of this story, Mr. and Mrs. Burns had a newborn baby girl and a son who was about 4 years younger than me. I was a family friend, and while in my high school years, would house sit while they were all away on business trips or vacation. This was a great gig for any teenager, and I always jumped at the chance to get away from it all and spend some time alone out there. That sounds like a terrifying nightmare, but we are different people. One summer, they asked me to stay at their place for a few weeks. Ooh, cool. The first week, I was to be alone as usual, but the second week, their son Robert was going to be there. Although not much younger than me, they, for some reason, wanted me to keep an eye on him, and we got along well enough, so this was all fine with me. I left for the ranch one late afternoon just as the shadows of the day were starting to bend longer towards the east. Weaving through the curves of the road and over old, low-water bridges, I finally crested a hill, made my way down to the last of the bridges, passed through a small forest, and then came out into the wide open space of prairie land. About 100 yards further down the road was the house. No matter how many times I went out to the ranch, I could never fully get over the creepy feeling that would wash over me the minute the house came into view. It always seemed foreboding and spooky. The place looked haunted. Wow, and you were like really excited to go there. I'd be like, I need to rethink my life. One corner of the house formed a rotunda. I love those. Oh, I love those. One corner of the house formed a rotunda in which Robert's room was located on the second floor. As I neared the house, I could see someone standing in the shadows of his room, holding the curtain back and watching me arrive. Pulling into the driveway, I saw the curtain fall back into place, swinging slightly. It seemed that someone was home, and I wouldn't be alone that first week after all. The driveway led around the house to the back door, which everyone used when entering or exiting the house. The only time I ever saw the front door used was after dinners, when we would go out to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. I locked up the car. Why? Went through the gate of the fenced-in yard and knocked on the door, waiting for whoever was inside to answer. When no one did, I went across the yard, past a 3-foot statue of the Virgin Mary, and toward what amounted to a cement room that had been built into the side of the hill. It was some sort of storm shelter, and near the door I found the keys to the house, which are always hidden there behind an old painting. As I let myself into the foyer and sat my bags on a bench, I kept calling out to let my presence be known. Dead silence was my only welcome. On the right side of the entranceway were the stairs that led up to the bedrooms. Under the stairs, and next to the bench upon which my bags sat, was the door that led to the basement. Beyond that door, and in front of me, was the dining room, the kitchen being to its left. To the right of the dining room was the rest of the downstairs, a few sitting rooms, the library, and an entertainment room. Sure, I saw someone at the window. I know I did, so I began a search of the house, starting with the first floor before working my way upstairs. The stairs ascended to an L-shaped hall. Just to the left were the master bedroom and bath, and to the right and down the hall past another bathroom were the baby's room and a spiral staircase that led to one of the sitting rooms below. The guest room I used, as well as Robert's bedroom, was around the corner at the end of the L. I searched these rooms, then went down to the basement, which had been renovated into a modern living room complete with a bar. I found nothing. Perplexed, but kind of used to how weird this house could be, I went back upstairs to unpack and start to enjoy my stay. I set up my guitar and amp in the entertainment room where I planned on creating songs. I was sure millions would jam to in years to come. The fridge was stocked, so that was no problem, and I'd brought along a ton of movies to watch on the VCR in the basement. Ah, the 80s. It seemed the only thing I had to worry about was the occasional phone call and feeding the dog, which was in a pen out near the old cement shelter. No problem as far as I was concerned. I had been house sitting there many times before, so I knew how eerie things would feel when evening came. Like I said, it just had the look of a haunted house. Not much happened that first night, and the next day I got up and fed and watered the dog, watched a few movies before taking a short walk around the property. That evening the phone rang, and it was Mr. Burns. He wanted to know how much it had rained the night before. I knew he was out of state, so I told him it didn't rain at all, but he insisted I check his rain counter, a measuring device that he had attached to a post near his mailbox. I went out, and sure enough, it had been completely dry the last few days, but there was about a 1/4 inch of water in the bottom of the thing. I went back to the phone, where he was waiting on the other line, and I told him. He didn't seem surprised and said it would probably rain that night. He told me to take care, make sure to keep the doors locked, and not to let anyone in when evening came. I liked Mr. Burns, and he was a decent guy, but sometimes he talked like that, making little sense at all. So I agreed to do as he said and hung up the phone. About 3 hours later, evening crept up on the ranch, and with it came the first storm of the summer. This wasn't just a small shower. This was a torrent. It came down heavy for about 30 minutes and then calmed to a steady downpour. Suddenly, the phone started ringing. I would answer, but no one would be there on the other end of the line. It rang like that all night, about 3 times an hour, and each time I picked up the receiver, I'd be greeted with silence. No voice, no signals, nothing, just silence. As the rain came down, I looked out the window down towards the road that led back to town, and I saw a flicker of light through the nearby forest and went to stand on the front porch to get a better look. Sure enough, there was someone down there. It seemed a vehicle had stopped just inside the forest at the low water bridge. Whoever it was had most likely been coming out to the ranch, so to make sure there was no trouble, I reluctantly slid on my bad weather clothes, went out to the shelter where I hung up the key, then made my way through the rain and mud down the road towards the light. The wind was howling and the rain was coming down in sheets, but I could still see that light shining whenever I raised my head to see where I was going. I finally got to the curve that led into the woods and towards the low water bridge, but when I made the turn, there was nothing there. By now, I was really freaked out. The bridge was flooded over and there were no tire marks on either side of it. I could clearly see the other side of the bridge, and no one had been down it since well before the rain started. Probably not since I came down the day before. I checked around a few more minutes to make sure no one happened to be there, needing help, and then made my way back to the ranch. The phone was ringing again as I entered, but I didn't bother picking it up this time. Let it ring. I had wet clothes to get out of and weird lights to think about. I was warming up in the kitchen a few hours later when I heard a car horn go off. A steady drizzle was coming down now, and looking out the window again, I noticed the lights near the bridge were back, this time dancing around the trees before turning up the road and coming towards the house. It was a car, and every few seconds the driver would toot the horn a few times. I got on my clothes, wrapped the still damp coat around me, and went out the back door, this time armed with a rifle. I could see nothing past the light of the porch, so went out into the storm carrying the rifle and a small flashlight. I went toward the barn and down the soggy driveway. The horn was still honking, but I could no longer see the road due to the tall brush in the fields, so the car was invisible to me, but getting louder by the minute. Everything suddenly seemed to build up. The car horn got louder. I could now see the glare of the lights growing through the bush. I found myself getting tense, pointing the now cocked rifle in the general direction of whoever was coming down the road. The horn rang out one more time, the light shined just a little brighter. I finally got to the end of the drive and went out onto the road. There was nothing there to greet me. Just a dark, wet, stormy night, and a muddy road that led to a very flooded bridge. Even the rain seemed to have eased up a bit. After a few minutes of trying to figure all this out, I gave up, covering the rifle so as to keep the water out of it. I trudged back toward the house for the last time that night, deciding it was safer inside than out in the open. Nothing much happened for the rest of the evening until about 4 a.m., when I was awakened by someone pounding on the front door. This was odd. Everyone always used the back door. Nonetheless, I got out of bed, put my clothes on, and went downstairs to find out what was going on. My body ached from being out in the storm the night before. I decided to hurry down the stairs and through the house as fast as possible, listening as the banging became more and more persistent. I had an idea that no one was going to be waiting for me on the porch, and when I opened the door, I was right. Unable to sleep, I looked around a bit, then brewed a large, strong pot of coffee and sat reading until the sun poked up over the horizon. The day was bright, hot, and humid, and after a short nap, I decided to take a walk around the properties. I hung the key back inside the shelter so as not to lose them, and as I did, I got a strong urge to go into the little room and explore a little bit. I have no idea why I would suddenly want to do this, since there was really nothing in there, and to be honest, it was not a place I wished to be in. Still, it took a little effort to walk away from the shelter. Something told me not to enter all the way, so I just stuck my hand in, quickly placed the keys behind the painting, and then shut the heavy door. I took a long walk. Before going back to the low-water bridge, I shut the barn door, which had come open during the previous night's storm. Then made my way to the top of the hill behind the house. From here, I got a great view of everything for miles and miles. I sat up there for some time, and then I went to the river. The bridge was still flooded out, but not as bad as before. There were no tire marks, and no evidence whatsoever of anyone being there, except for what tracks I had made. I still had no idea as to what had happened the night before. I would have thought it was all a prank, but the storm was a bad one, and besides, the bridge had been out. I went back to the ranch, and the first thing I noticed, the barn door was open again. Already on edge, I peered inside, closed the door, and placed a large rock in front of it. Later that afternoon, I was working on a few songs on my guitar. I kept getting a very strong feeling of someone standing right behind me. No matter where I would sit, the feeling was always there. Growing tired of it, I stopped what I was doing and said aloud, "Stop it! I'm trying to do something here." No sooner had I said this, the feeling stopped. It came back whenever I would start to practice my music, but went away when I told it to. The next day, I was upstairs going through some things when I heard very loudly someone downstairs yell out, "Hey!" It startled me at first, but then I thought it might be the family coming home early, so I put up what I was doing and went down to find an empty house. The rest of my time alone was uneventful, with the exception of a lot of weird feelings. The library for some reason spooked me, as did the shelter, and I refused to use the spiral staircase located next to the baby's room. I was somewhat nervous the whole time and took many long walks. Once, while sitting at the top of the hill, I saw a car coming towards the ranch. It passed through the forest and made it over the bridge. I was actually a little relieved. Robert had finally shown up. Robert's grandmother had brought him back from a summer camp he'd attended, and after we finally said our goodbyes, I sat on the porch with him listening to the various stories he had to tell and looking through the photos he'd brought back. I was reluctant to mention my own tales, but it didn't matter. Robert had grown up in that house. He knew something weird happened to me while I was alone there. We spent the next few days enjoying the good weather. We hiked, explored the valleys and forests along the road, and went on drives that took us to places neither of us had seen before. One night, just as the sun was setting, Robert finally asked me how my stay had been. I didn't hesitate in telling him some of the odd things that had happened, and he reaffirmed some of them with his own stories. It seems he too was drawn towards the cement cellar where the keys were hidden. The only difference was he'd gone inside, the heavy door slamming shut, locking him in. It was some time before he was able to push the thing open and get out. He said the Virgin Mary statue had been moved, so it was facing the doorway, as if watching his struggle. He was as confused as I was concerning the lights at the bridge and the mystery car, but he did mention seeing a lady come down the spiral staircase I was so afraid of. She came down, glared at him for a moment, and then went back up. Robert never found out who she was, but felt she was not very nice. He also told me of dreams he'd had about the library. They were vivid and scary and involved the closet. He had just recently discovered that a relative had been born in that room many years ago and had died there as well. Above each bedroom door was a small window, and Robert said one morning he woke up seeing the shadow of someone come down the hall and stand in front of his slightly open door. The person stood there for some time before Robert called out, thinking it was his father. When he got no reply, Robert screamed to his parents, and as they turned the corner in the hall, the shadow disappeared. That explained why I always felt watched whenever I tried to sleep in the guest room across the hall. As for Robert's room, I only went in there to get a CD now and then. I never felt comfortable in there, ever since I saw someone looking out the window at me as I came up to the house on the first day. Toward the end of my stay, Robert and I settled down one evening in the basement. We had movies to watch, and we were set for the night. There's a small bathroom between the foyer and the kitchen, and it's just an old-fashioned toilet that had a string you pulled when you wanted to flush it. The thing was loud. As we sat downstairs watching our second movie, we could hear it flushing. We inspected it before finally turning off the water and returning to our movies. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, we were in that zombie state just before sleep actually comes, and suddenly we heard the back door slam shut. Wide awake, we grabbed a few rifles that we'd brought down to the basement with us and listened. From right above us, we heard the unmistakable sound of boots shuffling across the foyer floor. They slowly came towards the basement door and stopped, and then we heard the door creak open. I admit, I finally came to understand the term shaking like a leaf, and Robert wasn't much braver. We were too scared to even try and pretend to be cool. For a moment, there was nothing. And then whoever was above us came walking down the stairs. We could hear someone brush against the coats that hung on pegs along the wall. We could hear the firm, deliberate sound of boots making contact with the warped boards that were the steps. The stairway going down to the basement was hidden behind a wall, so that anyone who came down could not be seen until they reached the bottom. The third stair from the bottom always made a horrible squeaking noise, and when we heard that, we raised our rifles and waited. And waited. And waited. Finally, when no one came into view, I told whoever was there that we were armed and to leave. There was no sound at all. Eventually, we gained a little courage and slowly peeked around the wall and up the stairway. No one was there. The door was shut. I was beyond scared at this point, and after going throughout the house and checking the doors and windows, we spent the rest of the night in the dining room talking about what had happened. To this day, I am unsure what to think. We heard, without a doubt, the back door open and slam shut, but when we checked it, the key was still in the lock, and the door was still bolted from the inside. Robert left the next day to go spend a few days at a friend's house. He wasn't surprised when I told him I was asking another friend of mine to come out and stay with me on my final night there. That night was quiet, except for the usual strange feelings. Even my friend mentioned it and left early the next morning. Rather than spend another day there alone, waiting for Mr. and Mrs. Burns to return, I wrote a note telling them I had to leave early to run a few errands, placing it on the kitchen table. I packed up all my things, made sure the house was clean, and then locked the door. A sudden sense of urgency overcame me as I walked to the shelter to put up the extra key. I came close to just tossing it in the room in my struggle to hurry, but somehow managed to put it back in its proper place on the hook. As I walked to the car, I noticed the barn door open again, and although I tried to ignore it, I ended up going over and shutting it. The big rock I'd put in front of it earlier was gone. No one ever said anything about me leaving early or asked how my stay was. Mrs. Burns would often laugh at the idea that our house could ever be haunted, but sometimes I think our laughter was a little forced. As for Mr. Burns, when I asked him how he knew it would rain the evening, I checked the level of the water in his gauge. He looked at me puzzled and swore he'd never even called me during that trip. I still don't know what to make of that place. Like I said, lots of strange things happened in and around the small town I grew up in, and that was just one of them. All right, my dears, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. That last story was amazing, and that's why I included it, because I had to. It was incredible and really well written. A lot of fun. So thank you for joining me on Haunted Summer Camps or, haunted house sitting adventures. I've had a few of those. You would know that if you've listened to this podcast for a while. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. And it brought back a lot of summer camp memories for me. Oh my Lord. Do you have any ghostly summer camp stories? I'd love to hear them. You know how to get a hold of us. You can either email us. That's the best way. Honestly, the best way. ghostsandbears@gmail.com. That's just ghosts, the letter N, bears@gmail.com. We've got that. You can go to the website and submit that way. Of course, we're always happy to get more patrons. We've had a couple join recently. And also thank you for the kind person who posted a review for us on Apple. We haven't had one for a while, so it was really, really great. So if you're listening and you'd just like a nice free way to give us a boost, give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That would be so amazing. So thank you for doing that to our friend who did that. I'm really, really grateful. Also, of course, we've got Patreon. And like I said, we've had a couple new additions, which I'm very grateful for because that really does help us out a lot. And now with everything, of course, everything is going up. So to put the podcast out and to maintain the websites and to do the distribution and yeah, they're getting every penny. So thank you for the people who actually support this. It's so, so, so needed and really, really, really appreciated. And if there's something as a Patreon you would like that you don't feel you're getting, please tell me because I would love to do that. As a patron, you do get fun stuff. You get the ghost stories we have heard on the weeks we don't drop an episode, and those are fun. We have a new bunch coming out right now with Jason and I on our latest trip, and they're pretty goofy and funny. And then we also have merch that comes with that. So there's stickers, coffee mugs, and t-shirts that are also coming out. We have a Redbubble store if you're interested. We've got stuff you can buy, which is great. Always fun to help us promote the brand. And of course, Instagram, Facebook, we're on there. Come find us. We would love to chat with you and are really, really grateful for all of our wonderful people who take the time to send us stories and talk to us. I'd love to do another listener episode story. So think of those stories. I'm thinking we need to do one where we do like a follow-up with all of the Ghost in My House people. I think that'd be really cool. Maybe that's an idea we should do for the fall. Just thinking out loud. Anyway, that's what's going on. But in the meantime, patrons, you are my favorite people in the whole wide world. And I want to thank you right now. So thank you to Dawn, Taylor, Michelle, Maria, Robin, Sherry, Gina, Sharon, Marion, Kathleen, McFizz, Mary Frances, Christopher, David, Ashley, Jeremiah, BB Nix, Melinda, Jordan, Tammy, Taya, Evan, Arwin, Steve, Kyle and Charlotte, Catherine, and Mari. Thank you so much. All of you are keeping us going. I'm very grateful to you. And I really hope that, you're enjoying it and you're enjoying the format. I'm loving the new format. It is much easier for me to do. It's a true joy. I don't dread it now. I look forward to it. It was a lot before, especially when we moved here in the new job and all that stuff. So now, it's just working full time, writing the Canada book and running a Ghost Walk company. So really, I've got nothing going on. But thank you all for continuing to listen. Get the word out. If you like the show and you think it's fun, spread the word. I mean, who doesn't love ghost stories? Everyone loves ghost stories. So thank you to all of you for that. Do come back because we will have another fun summer-themed episode coming up. And that's going to be in 2 weeks. And that one is, I'm trying to remember if I can find Ghosts of National Parks. So that's going to be fun. And then, there's another one after that, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to come back and find out. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being with us today. And no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, maybe you're getting ready to go off and be a counselor at summer camp. Keep us in mind. And remember that if you're ever stuck and you're like, where can I get actual stories with actual ghosts from actual bears? We're at Ghosts and Bears podcast. So do spread the word, and thanks again for your support. You guys are awesome. Stay cool. I mean that literally. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.